we can't look at the sponsors as like, oh, that's a revenue only. We need the sponsors to have an interesting point of view. They're creating interesting solutions for our ecosystem. And they should come to the table not only like ready to pay the bill, but also what can they share where our members can learn something new.
I'm Jonathan Gandalf, and welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour, powered by The Juice. Our mission is to squeeze out the deepest secrets of B2B marketing professionals to help you push your brand to the forefront of the industry. Let's raise the glass.
Welcome back to the Content Cocktail Hour. This is Jonathan, founder and CEO of The Juice, and we're thrilled to have you back. This is going to be a fun episode. I've gotten to know Aaron Leeder, VP of Partnerships from Pavilion, who's joining us today. Out in market at many different events, excited to dig into the Pavilion business and his role there and how marketers can learn from him today. Before I ramble too much, Aaron, why don't I let you introduce yourself in your own words, give a little bit of your background and what your role at Pavilion is.
Thanks, Jonathan. Happy to be here. I've been at Pavilion for the last 5 years. I look after our partnerships business, which does include a good deal of sponsorships as related to our events, both our larger tentpole style events, as well as our bespoke salon dinners, which we've been doing for 6 or 7 years now. My background is actually in music. I had an entire first career working in studios, playing in bands, touring the world. It was a lot of fun. No regrets. I had a roaring 20s and delayed my start into tech until my 30s. I came up through recruitment in the revenue operations space before coming to join Pavilion, nay Revenue Collective.
Love that. Well, I'm excited to dig into that unique background. I've got a little bit of a wandering career path myself, so interested to compare some notes there. This is the Content Cocktail Hour, though, so before we jump into that conversation, what are you enjoying drinking nowadays?
I do enjoy Michter's small batch. I enjoy it at the end of the day after many conversations. And it doesn't taste quite as good as when I have it in my Real Deal Steel purple cup. I'll provide a link afterwards if you want to check out my link. But I love the way this tastes. Got it on Amazon. That's a great place to have a beverage.
Influencer Aaron Leeder. We'll have to add that to the title. We'll get that link in the show notes. I'm a big bourbon fan myself. I actually just last night enjoyed a glass of Henry McKenna, which is my personal favorite. I lived in Kentucky for a number of years and used to be able to find it on the shelf for like $32, and you can't do that anymore. But love Michter's as well, so good call there. Always like talking to a fellow bourbon aficionado.
Right on.
Let's dig in. First, I want to start a little bit more on your background. You started in music, which is fascinating to me. We find a lot of correlation in some of the best marketers, which I know your role maybe isn't traditionally a marketer role, but we always find a tight correlation. Some of the best B2B marketers aren't traditionally trained marketers. They're journalists, teachers, writers, trained in theater. And I'm interested to know if you think kind of your unique background or your role in music or kind of having this beginner mindset when you first got into the B2B space was an advantage, a disadvantage? Does it provide a unique perspective on what you're doing now?
Anyone in the arts, like there's some level of self-starter and creativity, and also working in the arts, dealing with rejection and having a lot of at-bats doing something you care about and mixed results. And specifically to my work in one of the bands, I was in a band for 12 years, lots of wonderful experiences and a lot of no's, right? And a lot of high hopes. And then things, if you're not in the top 1% of whatever, you're not getting to where you think you might go. I think I learned a lot about working on a small team and being scrappy, needing to be, all right, the creative songwriter or producer, and also picking up the phone to call the venues to get booked for X, Y, and Z, making sure the account does not run out of money, making sure the car is full of gas. There's just all these elements that there's a lot to putting together a band and keeping it going for that long, which I think has served me in my current role of just understanding that it's everybody's job to keep the grass green, so to speak. And if you run out of money, your band has to break up.
Okay, I'm going to save our guests or our listeners some Googling here. Give us the name of the band, and can we still find it?
Yeah, you can still find the music. It's called Exit Clove, CLOV. It's stage directions from a Samuel Beckett play.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to go look that up myself. I know what I'll be listening to the rest of the day. I do think you're right though. The handling no, I think, is a big key. I often say like I have no idea what I'm doing, and I sometimes think that's my greatest advantage. Is I don't have bad habits, or I'm not going to do something the way it's supposed to be done just because that's the way it's always been done. I'm going to do some stupid things along the way. Some of them are going to work. Some of them are going to not work. I think that's a part of the fun. I started in B2B, then went into the B2C space and leaned on the B2B learnings. And then when I jumped back into B2B, I learned on the B2C. I leaned on the B2C learnings. And it's always been interesting to me how the outsider perspective, I think, has been more advantageous than some of the experience in the directly correlated space.
Spot on. And it's funny, like when I started in the technology space, it was through recruitment. And so many times when I'd be speaking to high growth SaaS, like my sweet spot was Series A to Series C scale up startup. And so many times the prerequisite would be experience in B2B SaaS.
Yeah.
And I'd speak to a hiring manager and understand the role and understand what's out there. And I would think like, I have candidates who could nail this role, but perhaps they're B2C or perhaps they're now coming from SaaS. And some interesting placements I've made over the years really took overcoming the perspective of a hiring manager or a company where they think they know what they wanted and they wanted a carbon copy of what it should be. Oh, we can't teach them B2B. We can't teach them what recurring revenue is. But the reality is like good people can be taught most things.
Yeah, I love that. I really didn't expect to be belaboring this point, but here we are. So maybe then just quickly to kind of wrap this portion of the conversation, what advice do you have for somebody who maybe is looking in to break into the B2B space or the broader SaaS technology space that doesn't have the traditional background?
Building relationships with people who look like where you want to be in 5 years and 10 years. Asking for advice, being respectful, not hitting click to apply on 100 jobs, reaching out to it's very easy to figure out who a hiring manager is for a job posting. Sometimes it's written in the job posting, reports to. Reach out to that person directly, send a video, send a voice note. I think like there's easy ways, but coming back to that theme of scrappiness, just like cut through the noise, that like don't do what everybody else does.
Yeah. Well, and again, what's the worst thing that can happen? They're going to say no. And you've heard that before now because of your previous experience. Yep. So love that. Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about Pavilion. If anybody is listening that is unfamiliar with Pavilion, go check it out at joinpavilion.com. I've been a member since the Revenue Collective days, which was kind of how it started, and it's rebranded into Pavilion. So you help professionals learn, grow in their career, build a community, which I think is very valuable. But then your role and other team members at Pavilion help support kind of the B2B or how you guys gain sponsorships, gain partnerships through brands. This is very familiar to me because we at The Juice have a little bit of a similar model where we've got users who sign up for our platform and then we monetize through brands who want to advertise or promote their content to those users. I'm curious, how do you balance those priorities, maybe you personally, and how's the team balance the priorities of the community and the actual brand B2B side?
For the team, I'll take the team first. Our North Star, our first value has not changed over the 5 years that I've been here. And it's always been that our members are first. We're solving for our members. They're hoping to learn a new skill, make a new connection, build their career. Sometimes it's their next role. Sometimes it's just doing their current job better. And when we're solving for that, when we do that at a high level consistently, all the other parts of the business seem to hum. So I've been in this interesting nook of the company where sponsorship, it helps the wheels turn around, but that's not the core business. That's not what's going to help tens of thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands of people. That's where we start. When we put together in-person events, whether it be a dinner, whether it be a day-long summit at a venue or a multi-day conference, part of the formula for how we can make the experience excellent for our members. I would put it as like ticket sales or membership dues are only going to take you so far. The sponsorships, it completes that pie. But like, here's the real answer to the question is that we can look at the sponsors as like, oh, that's a revenue only. We need the sponsors to have an interesting point of view. They're either services providers or software companies. They're creating interesting solutions for our ecosystem. And they should come to the table not only like ready to pay the bill, but also what can they share where our members can learn something new. And that's like the makeup of like how I think about, all right, here's who we want to position, here's the type of activation, and how does it make for a great experience for the attendee.
That's so powerful. I love even just the language of North Star metric. That's actually very similar to how we always say our North Star metric is our user growth and engagement. It's actually two statistics, but that combination is our North Star metric as well. And I think you're exactly right. When that is going well, the rest of the business kind of falls in line. When it's not going well, it's like, okay, we have to fix that. And I love how you still apply that perspective, even though it's not maybe your specific role, you have that perspective of how your role does impact that. I think is really, really powerful. So kudos to you and the team there.
I mean, I need to have that mentality, because if we don't have happy executives, that's like where the community started, a happy executive member, and then in turn, their teammates would join and we would have the associate community as well. If they're not there and engaged and enjoying their experience, there isn't a product to sell sponsors. So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the duck? I know that's not an expression, but like you have to think of like, you understand how the business works, and the business doesn't work if we get into a scenario where we are, put it as like beholden to the sponsors. There's plenty of other communities or other choices for people to join. Part of the brand identity and the allure of Pavilion is that yes, you are paying for your membership. So there's a promise and there's an expectation of what you're going to receive from your membership. If it's zero cost and we have to sell sponsors just to keep the lights on, then we're going to say yes to everything the sponsors ask and how they interact with our members. And that doesn't create a great member experience.
Because I'd imagine in the 5-year history you've had at Revenue Collective and now Pavilion, I imagine there have been times, moments, maybe very brief moments, when those have been in conflict, or at least there's been some disagreement amongst the team of like, what's the priority here? Is it the sponsorship? How do you work through that as a team?
You do what Sam tells you to do. but honestly, jokes aside, I think we've always paid attention to the percentage of what's coming in from sponsors and tried to keep an understanding of like, Aaron, we love sponsorship revenue, but not too much. Let's keep it at a point. So it's interesting because my role in many ways over the years has been, it's like community building, sales, and politics. Because it's like, also, how do you help the sponsors find their way within the community? Just because you're buying an experience, or whether it's at an event or whether it's a piece of content, it doesn't mean people are going to love you. So we have to coach them in terms of like how they increase their familiarity and favorability within the community.
I think there's a hidden lesson in there. I know you're tongue in cheek when you say we do what Sam tells us to, but I think it's a good lesson for the leaders who ultimately, like, that consistency in staying true to your North Star does fall on the leader of the business, right? Like, are you the thermostat that sets the temperature? Or are you the thermometer that takes the temperature, right? And I think I'd imagine Sam does a pretty good job of keeping you all aligned to that North Star.
Absolutely. And I think a lesson I've watched over the last 5 years and seen him grow his leadership and grow the community also is that he repeats, like, every time we get together for a quarterly or a biannually Sam speech, we start with talking about our first metric, our North Star metric. And like, these are our values. It's a reminder. It's never news to anyone that it's like, what we're solving for is helping GTM professionals grow their career. You're going to work at a lot of companies if you're in the B2B SaaS space over the course of 15, 20, 25 years, whatever it is. And Pavilion can be that place where you're always building network. You're always learning what's going to help you do your job better.
That's so good. I love that lesson. Okay, let's shift a little bit to like your role specifically. You sell sponsorships. A lot of those happen at events. There's a lot of like groundswell right now with marketers of, is the booth experience going away? Is the booth a good investment? Is event sponsorship good investment? And maybe it doesn't have to be tied specifically to like the large tentpole events, but just broadly, and then maybe we'll dig in specifically, like, what are you seeing kind of the trend of sponsorships? What's working, what's not working? What kind of at a high level are you seeing happening in the space right now?
I will answer the question, but something I would tie to it is like the trope you'll read of like, cold calling is dead, cold outbound is dead. Some companies come in and they speak with me and they say, like, the booth just doesn't work for us anymore. And then I start asking questions like, all right, cool. Well, what did you do at the booth? Who did you send? How did they prepare for the conference? Did you go over their talk track with them? Did they have an understanding of the types of people who were going to be in the room? Did they practice? Were they on their phone hanging out at the booth? Did they eat their lunch at the booth? The questions could go on, but I think that I don't think the booth is dead, frankly. And it's not just because I sell them. I've seen a lot of companies have a lot of success at the booth, and I think it's thinking outside the box, and you don't have to spend a ton of extra money to make the booth valuable. I just think you have to make sure that you're paying attention to make the experience unique. I think you have to pay close attention to who you're sending and how they're prepared. I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some of the things that are on my mind in terms of what works and what doesn't work. Another big success story, and the Juice participated at GTM in terms of not only thinking about the event itself and what are the other satellite experiences that, whether it's Pavilion, whether it's another conference, what else is out there? And attendees like to have these social experiences outside walking the conference floor. And those have worked quite well for some of our sponsors and partners.
You're exactly right. It's a trope, and I know that's the language you just used, but the outbound is dead, email is dead, the booth is dead. It's I always say outbound isn't dead. Your outbound is just lazy and uninspired, right? The booth isn't dead if you do it right and you invest the time and energy and beyond just the financial resources into bringing a booth to life. I think it can be done extremely well. I also agree on your point on the social activations. We sponsored pickleball at Go to Market, and we're not scanning badges at pickleball. We're not getting a lead list at pickleball, but people are having a good time, and you all and your team are doing a great job of highlighting our brand. We're meeting a ton of people in a really condensed environment who are just having fun and having a good experience. And I think then you're right. The onus is on us as a team to take those relationships that were fun at pickleball and figure out if there's a very altruistic way to support the people we met at that event. I mean, it feels aligned to our brand. It feels aligned to what Pavilion does. And I think you kind of have to see what you have resources to invest in. We as a team don't have the resources to invest in that really high quality booth experience, not financially, but from a number of team members perspective, from a who can be there perspective, from a how we can spend our time at an event perspective. The booth there's an opportunity cost there that we would rather spend it doing something like pickleball. So I think it's knowing your brand and knowing your audience and being willing to be creative with some of the playbooks that happen around an event.
I love how you think about it. And I think it ties back to something I said 15 minutes ago of just your favorability within the community is affected by the experience that you tie yourself to. So you spent the time and energy goofing off and having fun and doing something that felt social at the end of a conference. That was the last taste of the conference for many people. And the Juice was part of that. That's cool.
Yeah. Love that. I want to then get super granular on something you mentioned earlier, salon dinners. I have stolen a saying from one of my mentors. I think breaking bread is the best marketing strategy. Mm. It's not inexpensive though, or it's expensive. Instead of doing the double negative, I'll just say it's expensive. But I think there's something to be said for the bond that is built over breaking bread. To go back to that saying, you said you've been doing this for a long time. I know the ROI is there personally, but it's tough for a brand to look at what that bill is going to be for a dinner. What would you say to folks who are maybe considering that kind of getting out in market and hosting the dinner strategy?
I understand the point of view of a marketer who has to turn to their CFO and say, the cost per lead is X because they only do 18 to 22 at dinner, and this is what it costs. And then the head of finance says, well, we're not running other programs where the cost of lead is blank. That is a tough conversation for them. And I think that they need to remove, I'll use Pavilion as an example because that's who you're speaking with. But you need to understand, when you're coming to have that experience, it's not food and beverage. It's the attention of a table full of executives. They're not behind their computer and multitasking and checking their phone and doing 3 different things. They're in the room with you, and you have that opportunity to build a meaningful relationship. And yes, food is the great equalizer in life. Food and beverage. We all need to eat. You can't talk about cost per lead because that positive experience, and again, like coming back to that idea of like having a favorable association with your brand, somebody who might attend a dinner, they might not be your buyer, but they might go tell 3 of their friends because they had an awesome time. And it's not like the cost of that one person who was having steak.
That is so good. I love that you're paying for the attention and the dedicated attention, captive audience, right? And not just the lead, as well as the potential network effects of that audience. That's the playbook. I think you just gave it to anybody who is considering that strategy. I really appreciate that perspective. It's one I'll be leaning on as I make the case for some of these. Last question on this topic. What is the most creative activation you've seen somebody have?
So I'm working with a company who they took their booth and essentially made it impossible. They made it hard to enter. They turned it inside out, so to speak. They turned it into a speakeasy. They weren't serving alcoholic beverages. They were serving non-alcoholic cocktails, mocktails, but you couldn't even see the name of their company on the outside. You had to go in to see it. And then once you're in, like you got to talk to them. But I thought that was very creative.
That is very gutsy and very cool.
Yeah.
I love that activation.
Like a trendy Los Angeles restaurant that you're not supposed to know about. Like there's no name. You can't find it on Google Maps, right? Yeah, that one's interesting.
That's so cool. Well, Aaron, the last question we always like to ask our guests, what's an unpopular opinion that you have as it pertains to your role or the world that you're in?
Sponsor is not a dirty word. And I think that when it's handled correctly, it can be very effective. Well, in this case, it's a community, right? But it can be very effective for the member experience as well as the sponsor experience. There's a fine line where it teeters and totters and you can't lean in too far to the sponsors or you upset the members and you can't ignore the sponsors. You get it. There's a middle zone. There's a gray area with which I live in. And I think at times in the ecosystem, like people shy away from saying what it is that they're doing. And I think over the years, we've come to a place where we own it, that like sponsorship is part of the experience.
I like that. And I think especially if you have your interests, your North Star tied to the member experience, like the sponsor should fall in line with that. And it's like, that can be a win-win for everybody involved. And I think you're right. Like just say what it is. Like the genuine and the authenticity that goes into that is better for everybody involved, especially in the sales and marketing space. Everybody knows we're not tricking anybody here. Let's just call it what it is and it'll be better for everybody involved.
Agreed. And I think also for the sponsors out there, we understand you need to show leads, you need to show pipeline in month, in quarter, whatever it may be. There has to be a practice around preparing for a long-term game and thinking long-term about the relationships you're building in this ecosystem. Because once you get in, it's vast. There's tens of thousands of sales and MarTech companies. But in reality, the relationships you'll build and the people you know, it's like, it's not that vast.
It shrinks really fast.
It shrinks. So like, do the right thing over and over and over again, build good relationships, don't spam people, and like things work out. It just takes time.
Yeah. Love that. Well, thanks so much for your perspective today, Aaron. If people want to learn more from you or learn more about Pavilion, what's the best way to do that?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to share my emails, aaron@joinpavilion.com. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to meet with you.
We'll get all those links in the show notes, as well as a link to your purple steel cup.
And remember, it just doesn't taste quite as good as when I have it in my purple Real Deal steel cup.
There you go. The final plug from the influencer, VP of Partnerships, Aaron Leeder at Pavilion. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. To all of our watchers, to all of our listeners, thanks for coming along to another episode of the Content Cocktail Hour. Until next time, cheers.
Thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour powered by The Juice. If you want to see more episodes or more resources curated for your role, join us on app.thejuicehq.com. See you next time, same place. Cheers.